Hey there, guys. Thank you for joining me for another Holy Shed, and a huge welcome to you, one and all, wherever you may be. And it is a fact that shedsters, like all good things, are scattered across the face of the earth. Speaking of which, I would like to say a very special hello this evening to Susan down under in New Zealand, a faithful friend to this parish, who had a stroke earlier in the year, but thankfully seems to be doing quite a lot better now. We send you, Susan, lots and lots of love and loads of good wishes for as speedy a recovery as possible. And of course, we send our love and good wishes to any other shedsters who have been or who are going through a tough time. We hold you in our hearts and send you lots of love from the bottom of the garden. Now, there's a whole school of theology, which you may have heard of, known as Process Theology, which I, along with many other progressively minded people, find quite profoundly appealing. It's linked to the process philosophy of a man called Alfred North Whitehead, a British mathematician and philosopher. He was born in 1861 and died in 1947. And you can tell from those dates that Whitehead's life spanned a very interesting period in the history of the world. Also, a very interesting period of history in the world of science, dominated by figures like Darwin and Einstein, who transformed our vision of ourselves, of the world, of the whole universe, and in the case of Einstein in particular, transformed our understanding of space and time. Based on this whole burgeoning scientific revolution of the early 20th century, Whitehead argued that everything that is alive is always in a state of process, of becoming, and constantly being remade. Indeed, that everything which is alive is itself a process. And he argued that, contrary to the way things had been thought, reality is not comprised of lots of little units, atoms of matter, all fixed in place, but reality is much more relational and comprised of these moments of becoming, what he called drops of experience. So nothing is predetermined. The future is always open to novelty, to newness and transformation, all of which is a little bit abstract. But I guess each of us can relate to it in a more personal way by just glancing back over our life and realizing how so much hinged on seemingly random events, and on choices, not necessarily good choices, maybe ignorant choices that we and others around us made, but had profound consequences. It's I find it's a pretty mind-fricking thing to contemplate, actually. Like, for instance, what if my friend had not introduced me and Pat to each other? Or what if my parents hadn't met? I think we probably know the answer to that, but it's not just about me. Our children wouldn't have existed. Their children wouldn't have existed. Countless generations after them, off into the future, would not have existed or would not exist. And when you multiply that over the entire earth, I mean, how different the entire world might have been if, just if, this or that. I mean, it basically amounts to the fact that life is constantly open and not predetermined. Unless, of course, that is, you believe in a Calvinistic style God, a cosmic control freak, controlling and ordering everything according to some predetermined plan, which I think turns God into much more of a monster and not the loving, vulnerable God revealed in Jesus, more of which in a moment. Whitehead himself started out as an atheist, but he became convinced that for the universe to operate in the way he understood it to, there had to be something else at work that he ultimately was happy to define as God. But he went further in his thinking to conclude that God is not only the source of genuine novelty, but that God shares in this capacity for newness. Indeed, God is him or herself in process. Now, that might sound quite radical and a little bit freaky, but actually, if you read the Bible from that perspective, you find it makes a lot more sense. If you don't read it through the lens of, prefixed doctrines that are imposed on the text, then you suddenly find there's an awful lot more that fits in with this. I mean, there are just so many passages in the Bible, especially in the Hebrew Scriptures, which, seem contrary to the idea of this omni God who knew everything and controlled everything and so on. There are many instances where God changed his or her mind, aren't there? To pick an example, there's the story of Noah. In the days of Noah, it says that God looked down and saw, as if for the first time, that the world was full of evil, that the whole thing was kind of screwed up, and decided, therefore, to drown the whole lot, and pretty much anyway, and start again. Well, you kind of think, didn't God know that already? Didn't God know that was going to happen? Did it take God looking down to see what was going on? What you find when you actually look into the actual text of the Bible is something that's quite a lot different to these dogmatic assertions that you so often find coming in, popular theology. But let me just show you a little clip by a process philosopher called Thomas J. Oord as he gives his take on what process theology means. Have a look at this.
Yeah, process theologians have a lot of different ways of explaining process theology, and so it's kind of hard to put it all in one little nutshell. But typically speaking, process theologians emphasize that existence is in process, that things are not little bits of matter bouncing around already settled, but that there's an ongoingness to time. And most importantly, perhaps, God is a part of the ongoingness of time. So most process folks think that time is real for God and creation, that there's an interrelatedness, that each individual, whether it's a small little entity or a very complex elephant, is interdependent and interrelated with its environment and its past. Also, most process thinkers following Whitehead want to talk about existence as being more event-oriented, or the technical language is an actual occasion, but it's more experiential than it is little bits of matter or mechanistic sorts of ways. And the process tradition wants to avoid any sort of hint of determinism by saying that there's agency, or in complex creatures, freedom, that there's some sort of indeterminateness even at the most basic levels of existence. So there's a lot of ways to define process thought, but I would say the ongoingness of time, the genuine freedom or agency in the world, the interdependency or interrelatedness, and that the world itself is made up of events or moments or drops of experience.
Wow, well, there's quite a lot to think about there, isn't there? And as I say, some of this may freak you out, but just let yourself kind of explore this. Whitehead significantly refocused a vision of God. He took it away from certain traditional notions, but in ways that I, for one, find very appealing, very compelling. Probably his most famous criticism of the typical conception of God is that, and I quote, the church gave to God the attributes which belonged exclusively to Caesar. The church gave to God the attributes which belonged exclusively to Caesar. In other words, Whitehead is arguing that this whole notion of God as a divine king has been overly shaped and influenced from images here on earth of the dominant figures like Caesar or any other ancient ruler who imposed their will and purpose on people and on the world. So we end up with these sort of almighty figures imposed upon God. And Whitehead said, no, 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 we need to stop doing this. We need to stop projecting the sort of image of rule and power of earthly leaders back onto any notion of divine kingship and rule. And opposed to this, Whitehead emphasized an image of God which he called the brief Galilean vision of humility. I think you can see where he's coming from there. He was interested in the brief Galilean vision of humility. In other words, he's saying that Jesus showed us a different picture of God, and importantly, a different notion of power. Not the power of dominion or control or coercion. We don't see that in Jesus and in his understanding of God at all, but rather the power of love. So Whitehead isn't saying that God isn't powerful, but saying that we've imposed on God, on the image of God, a wrong idea of power, which is based on the dominance of earthly kings and rulers. And so let me tell you, this is how Whitehead describes what he called the brief Galilean vision of divine humility. He says, it does not emphasize the ruling Caesar or the ruthless moralist or the unmoved mover, but dwells upon the tender elements in the world, which slowly and in quietness operate by love. In other words, he's saying that Jesus utterly redefined power away from dominance and might and authority in that sense, towards a vision of power expressed in love and grace. Now, it's all pretty radical stuff, but the appearance of Jesus was pretty radical stuff. Jesus showed us a revised, renewed, and reimagined vision of who and what God is. But here's the thing, a few thousand years before Whitehead and before process theology and all that, the writers of the Jewish Bible, the Jewish Torah, the Torah is the first 5 books of our Bible, which form the central part of Scripture for Jews. These writers had their own version of process theology. When Moses encountered God in the burning bush, as he tried to argue with God against, the command or the will of God to go back to Egypt to free the Hebrew slaves, Moses asks, when the Israelites ask me who sent me and what is your name, what shall I tell them? The reply is, Aher Asher Aher, which literally translates, I will be what I will be, or I am becoming what I am becoming. So we've commonly been told that it's I am that I am, but that's much too static for what the Hebrew is really expressing. And so the shorter version that God says, tell them, Aher sent you, is in Hebrew, it's the first person future tense of the verb to be. Okay, got that, Moss? In other words, we could say that God's name is becoming or process. I will be what I will be. I like the way that Rabbi Toba Spitzer puts what God said. She puts it like this: say to your enslaved kin, there is a power in the universe whose name is becoming. What is now is not what will be in the future. This power of transformation will free you from slavery because it makes possible the most audacious change. So we could say that God is the ultimate potentiality of all potentialities, or as the fiction writer Octavia Butler wonderfully puts it, God is infinite potential. God is change. I love that. But what does all of this have to do with us? Well, quite a lot, I think, more than we could unpack just now. Charles Hartshorne, a colleague of Whitehead, wrote a book wonderfully entitled Divine Omnipotence and Other Theological Mistakes. And, the book pretty much does what it says on the tin. It deconstructs the notion of divine omnipotence, almightiness, and or at least it completely reimages what that can mean. But on a more personal level, all of this affirms our significance as choice makers and people who can change things, make things happen in a quite radical way. We're not mere pawns in a divine game. We're part of the divine process of things, and we are invited to unite our wills with God's will for a better, more spiritually, socially, and personally evolved world. I mean, for example, if prayer has any real significance or meaning, I think it is the alignment of our deepest inner self with the divine intention and purpose for the world. Prayer is the refocusing of our commitment to live in ways that are actively redemptive instead of defeatedly apathetic. We can become co-creators of the future with God. We indeed are choice makers. But what choices will we make? At the very end of the Torah, in Deuteronomy 30, verse 19, Moses stands before the Israelites on the border of the so-called Promised Land, and he calls upon them to make a choice, to follow the path of loving God and of faithfulness to that relationship. And he basically tells them that the future is open. They have a choice. He says, I call heaven and earth to witness today that I have set before you life and death, blessings and curses. Choose life, he says, so that you and your children may live. Now, I think that actually could quite easily be a prophetic statement to our world right now in the light of the climate crisis. Choose life, not death, for your children, for the creatures of the earth. Choose life, not death. Interestingly, the Torah, the first 5 books of the Bible, the heart of the Jewish scripture, begins and ends with a choice. In Genesis 3, it's a choice to become humanity in the true sense of what humanity means. Adults with the ability to know right from wrong and do good or bad, or instead to remain infant-like, innocent and incapable of moral choice forever. I mean, surely that was a no-brainer. Imagine if Eve hadn't been brave enough to contend with the irony of the divine command in Scripture, and I think it's important to recognize the irony in it. I mean, what was the choice? Humans would have been forever subhuman, amoral creatures. That would have been an entirely different form of humanity, an entirely different earth experience. So that's the first choice right at the beginning of the Torah. Are you going to grow up and become adult, morally sensitive people, or live on in this so-called paradisal innocence? The second choice at the end of Deuteronomy, at the end of the Torah, is between life and death, a choice between embracing a true and faithful relationship with the source of life or to be engulfed by the ways of death. As I've argued in my books and talks, the beautiful Genesis myth, and that's not a put down, it's a put up. The beautiful Genesis myth isn't about a moral fall. That's not mentioned in it at all. It's not the birth of original sin, which again doesn't appear in the text in any shape or form. The idea of sin being genetically passed down through the generations. No. The passage is about the birth of moral consciousness. It's not a tale of paradise lost, but rather paradise outgrown. It's no wonder, therefore, that the Torah ends with an adult choice between life and death, between blessing and curse. Who wouldn't choose the path of blessing and life? Well, sadly, the answer is quite a lot of people. The embrace of greed and ignorance, the death wish that drives us to favour short-term economic growth over the well-being of the earth and its creatures is all too apparent in our world today, as is the path of war and conflict, of racism and every other form of prejudice. These are a choice for death over life, curse over blessing. The choice of moral consciousness over ignorant, amoral naivete was made for us in the process of evolution that's pictured beautifully in the Genesis myth. But the choice between life and death is, as ways of being in the world, is ours to make still, every day, every moment. I talked at Greenbelt, repeated it in the Holy Shed a few weeks back. I talked at Greenbelt about the world being divided between what I call give a shits and don't give a shits. In the idiom I'm using today, it's a division between people making a choice between life on the one hand and death. Now, of course, as I pointed out, it's not so simple as that. A choice for life, or for giving a shit, or a choice for death, not giving a shit, isn't a once-for-all decision. I've made it and now that's who I am. No, we make these choices all the time, every week, every day, many times a day perhaps. We can't make a permanent booking, we have to relodge our choice every morning, every noon and night. But there is the question of who are we becoming? What is the pattern in our becoming? Which direction are we headed in? Sure, we can all vacillate a little between these two things of life and death, of giving a shit and not giving a shit. But where is the overall direction in our life? Rabbi Tober relates a midrash, a rabbinic commentary on the biblical creation story, which imagines God asking the angels whether human beings should be created. Well, half the angels were in favour, praising humanity's amazing ability to do acts of love and justice. The other half opposed the suggestion, pointing out the human capacity for lies and violence and so on. In the end, God goes ahead and makes Adam. As Rabbi Tober says, the Midrash illustrates the deep truth that with the evolution of human beings, the potential for great goodness was inevitably accompanied by the potential for great evil. From an amoeba to a fish to a chimpanzee to a human being, with every level of evolutionary complexity comes greater capacity for choice and greater opportunity for love as well as hate, for creativity as well as destruction. It's all about process, about becoming. And the process hinges in some significant part on choice. According to what the divine voice spoke to Moses, God is becoming. God is always becoming. And my decision to trust in this becoming God is because I entrust myself to the incredible, mysterious, and wild source of life I sense in everything. Many people speak to me about feeling powerless in a world where so much is wrong. Guys, we are not powerless. We are not powerless. We are part of the process of becoming. Okay? I refuse to be a victim of those who choose death. I will be a part of the process toward life in the world. Even one little choice, one decision to do what is right, to show love over aggression, to seek justice over apathy, to create beauty over ugliness, to live in humility over against ego. Each choice like this is a becoming. And what we're saying here tonight is it's a becoming not just for myself, but for friends, for strangers, for the community, for the world, because the ramifications of one single act can be mind-boggling. This is the gospel message. It's the gospel message I understand, guys. A choice between the path of life and the path of death. I'm not talking heaven and hell in the afterlife here. I'm talking about heaven and hell, life and death, here and now. To care about the planet and its precious creatures is a life or death choice. To care about issues of justice is a life or death choice. To care about refugees or the homeless, to care about racism, misogyny, and homophobia, and so much more. These are all life and death choices. Choosing to be kind to a stranger, to lend a helping hand, to do what we may know to be right, are all issues, choices of life or death. Which direction are we going to go down? They're all about becoming and unfolding becoming, which we have the opportunity to be part of, to influence. And the question is, who are we becoming? What is our world becoming? There'll be more process theology in future sheds, and you'd be very welcome to send me your thoughts and responses to it all. But this is a little introduction to the subject. And I'll finish with another quote from the novelist Octavia Butler. I think I can put it on the page, on the screen. She wrote, "God is change, and hidden within change is surprise, delight, confusion, pain, discovery, loss, opportunity, and growth." And each of these things really traces back to this choice between life or death, the way of blessing or the way of curse. I find it all very exciting. So much so, here is a prayer about eternal becoming. We give thanks, source of life, for the miracles that greet us each day, morning, noon, and night. Not events that happen outside the laws of nature, but the miraculous events which are the laws of nature. For intimations of divinity that inundate our world constantly, everywhere. For the miracles of breath, for bodies that breathe and thrive in this process of inexorable flux we call life, forever evolving, forever becoming something new. As our beautiful planet whisks us around the sun like swinging chairs on a fairground ride, and the turning of the Milky Way whirls our lives through unimaginable passages of space, help us to know that life never stands still, is always in process, and that faith, like nature, dies and rises, is continuously reborn. That truth is a journey, not a destination. That we are in your eternal becoming. Amen. Okay, well, I invite you, if you have a drink handy, to join me for a toast to sum all this up. It's a toast to the unexpected, to what is possible, even though we can't see it yet. A toast to choices that really can make a difference, however small they may be. A toast to the eternal becoming, which is God. To life, l'chaim. There you are then, dear friends. If you like what I'm doing here in the Holy Shed, you can support us. You can buy us a coffee by just following the link which is on the screen here. It's always at the top of the posts on the Holy Shed Facebook page too. And we're very grateful for your support in this way. Another way to support us, by the way, is to subscribe to the Holy Shed on YouTube. Costs you nothing, but it is actually quite important, because the more people we have subscribing, the more it helps us to promote what we're doing. Or you can like the Holy Shed Facebook page. Just tick the thumbs up. Again, it helps to give us a higher profile out there, and it's much appreciated. So there we are. I'm going to finish in a moment with a blessing, but meanwhile, I bid you to go out into the world and make a choice to be kind to those around you. Choose to be kind to yourself. Choose to be kind to the earth and its creatures. Stay human, stay wild, and I'll see you soon. Here's a blessing.